Welcome to our first monthly online teaching for the Margha program. Each month, Lopan, Liz, Camille, or I will provide some commentary from our own perspective on the text that we're reading each month. This was originally intended to be live, and then you could also watch it um, on tape. But we decided, after consulting with our tech expert, that it would be better to record in advance and then upload so that there wouldn't be all of a sudden glitches in the middle and you'd be losing contact with the video or whatever, and we'd have to troubleshoot that, or we wouldn't know you were having that problem. So let's consider this sort of live on tape. In other words, I am alive in this moment as I'm offering this. And whenever you tune into it, that moment is also live. So hopefully the unpolished quality of this will help to enhance that sense of spontaneity and in the moment live teaching. Um, and we'll see how it goes. Um, So I'm going to be looking primarily at chapters 1 and 2 of Awakening Through Love, since those are chapters for this month. Um, Obviously, I can't cover the whole 2 chapters, and I just want to highlight some aspects of it, which are especially resonant for me, and I hope illuminating for you. Um, and hopefully this can spark your own investigations and conversations around the text. It's a text that bears reading and rereading many times, as I've done for years now, um, if it speaks to you. And so don't assume that you have to get everything out of it on one reading. Some of it may seem a little um, hard to understand or to fully grasp with the conceptual mind, especially chapter 2, which is the wisdom chapter. And we'll say a little bit more about wisdom in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It's not just the accumulation of knowledge, and it's not what you can put into words. It's direct experience of one's true nature, one's deeper nature, and the deeper nature of all reality, which is kind of a holy mystery, ultimately, but one that's very familiar, actually, if we begin to investigate and explore our own experience. So um, that's something that we can explore for a lifetime. So do not be daunted, please, by some of the language in chapter 2, especially. On the other hand, you may be tremendously inspired by some of it. Um, so um, I want to begin with the opening line of chapter 1, in which John quotes, "My root spiritual teacher, Noshul Kempo, has said that a moment of enlightenment is a moment when we realize, quote, the blessings that are always pouring forth." Now, he goes on to explain that some of those blessings are unconditional love, warmth, understanding, communion with others in deep care and resonance. Um, but I would like to read the origin of that quote. He's quoting a line from a longer passage in this book, Natural Great Perfection. That's Nosho Kempo, who died in 1999. He was Lama John's root teacher. He was my root teacher. I met him in 1994. Lama John, who was not a Lama then, introduced him to an august assembly of people at Harvard Divinity School. And we'll actually talk about that a little later. John describes that event later in the chapter 2. Um, but that chapter, which is that passage about the blessings that are always pouring forth, is my favorite passage. And some of you who know me have heard me quote it before, read it in its entirety. I'd like to do that now, and then we'll unpack it a little and explore how it relates to the other chapter. Um, so in this passage, you could substitute the word benefactor for guru or teacher, if it makes sense, because the intention is the same. And don't worry about all the Tibetan terminology. I think it will become clear enough, and he explains it for his purposes clearly enough. You do not need to be a scholar to receive the wisdom of this. So he's talking about Guru Yoga or Buddha Yoga, which is a traditional Tibetan practice of evoking a vision of the enlightened teacher, which could be the Buddha, it could be a teacher that you personally resonate with, almost an emissary of the Buddha, or it could be even formless in a way, but your sense of enlightened presence. Will often refers to these benefactors, but in this case, spiritual benefactors. And we'll say a little bit more about spiritual benefactors later. Maybe you think that a teacher has a body or bones or hair, or that you need one hair of the teacher or a red protection cord to get blessings. That's the relative teacher. If you really want to know what the guru means, the guru is the entire self-arising phenomenal universe. It is like an example, the symbolic master. It's not the human teacher that is the master. Truth is every single momentary arising, the entire phenomenal universe. The absolute guru or teacher is the nature of all things. Don't think it is just some old man or woman, some lama or guru figure. There is a Nirmanakaya, the manifest lama, like the Buddha in human form, the living teacher. There is a Sambhogakaya, the energy, the mystical guru, manifesting as experience, the true nature of our own experience, the inner guru. Then there is the most formless absolute guru, the Dharmakaya, the great luminous emptiness. All of these can be realized in one moment of great resting of pure awareness, the great letting go of all things called the Yeshe Lama, the wisdom, the Gnostic master or the inner guru, the great leaving it as it is. If you want to go even further, there is the infinitely radiant from within nature of all things that is like a total Buddha blessing manifesting everywhere. The thusness guru, isness. Everything that is in this Dzogchen collection, this treasure house, this mandala, is actually the display or the energy of the enlightened guru or the Buddha mind. All animate and inanimate existence and all experiences, outer and inner, are actually the Buddha, the true teacher. If you understand the great perfection teachings, every moment these blessings pour forth. One is never apart from the true guru, the Buddha, one's own primordial nature. Well, that's a vast statement. And I want to call attention to, it may seem vast and out of reach, but remember he said, all of this can be experienced in one moment of great letting be, the leaving it as it is. Do you remember our 3 letting be practice? That's discussed in this chapter 2. That's the power, the potential power of that practice. Yes, it helps us ground ourselves in the body and to tune into the breath and to let go and relax and allow the mind to fall open. And sometimes it's just a matter of settling and arriving so that we can move on, supposedly, to the more important parts of the meditation where you receive from the benefactors and extend eventually. But in itself, it is the heart of the wisdom practice, deep letting be, tuning into the quality of our being, the depth of our being, and just allowing the body to be as it is, the breath to be as it is, and the mind to fall open into its natural openness as it is, enables us to approach and access this quality of being. And that, as Nesho Kempo was saying, is available in any moment. every moment these blessings pour forth, but we may not notice them or appreciate them because we're caught up in reacting or feeling separate from things, or our usual, distracted by our usual habitual trains of thinking. So let's not overlook the power of the three letting bees. And those three letting bees are the practices that we do as a standalone practice, a supportive practice, or a deepening practice. And they are also the same spirit of letting be takes place at the end of our visualization practice of receiving and so on. When we let go of the visualization and release into pure, open, warm, expansive awareness, allowing everything to come and go freely, and, like ripples on a pond, like clouds in the sky. So the three letting bees actually, and that letting be stance takes place at the end of the practice, every practice, and also at the beginning. And those of you who were in the first year of the Margha program, the natural meditation, this is at the heart of natural meditation too. And although we worked with relative practices, shamatha, focusing on a physical object, on the breath, on a visualized object, and then while developing a kind of calm abiding in the process of doing that, we then investigate the mind, moving mind, the still mind, with sort of inquiry questions, where the thoughts come and go. Very similar to what you see in this second chapter, where John presents other such inquiry questions, looking at what is awareness, what is its color, its shape, where does it abide? And these are not so much inquiries to figure out as to experience, to do as an experiment. What would it be like if I asked that question and really just looked, not trying to figure it out, but experientially, what does that point to? As John said beautifully, sifting them like sand in the hands, just sifting through the experience, as it were. He also gives us a hint about how we might approach the language in this chapter and also these inquiries. When you, at the very beginning of chapter 2, and I would encourage you, it's so easy to read that and say, yeah, I'll take it in that spirit. And then we try to rack our brains to wrap around the concepts here. So he reminds us, indeed, much of the language is intended to pull us beyond the narrow confines of our usual thinking process. Often the words have an aesthetic function akin to profound, evocative poetry that can transport us beyond our accustomed ways of seeing. Please read the chapter in that spirit, letting it engage not only your thinking mind, but your aesthetic appreciation, intuition, and heart. So that too is how we can listen to Nosho Kempo's beautiful evocation of the ultimate guru, which is the nature of all things. To feel that with our heart and with our direct experience. To notice the sense of blessing, not trying to pin down what the blessings are, let's say, in our experience. Now, he went through, remember, all animate and inanimate existence, all experiences, outer and inner, are actually the Buddha, the true teacher. Now, how might that be? There's another frame of looking at the guru called the 4 kinds of gurus. And again, guru is not like some idolized figure, but rather the spirit of enlightenment as embodied by the Buddha and other teachers, and as we can experience within ourselves our own inner Buddha. So traditionally they've said there's 4 types. There's the guru in human form, the teacher. That could be our own teacher. He could be the way our teacher represents the lineage that they come from, the Buddha, figures like Tara, whoever it is that inspires that for you. And now we're getting into the realm of so-called spiritual benefactors, which can be very helpful in our practice of innate love and wisdom. And I'll come back to that a little later about spiritual benefactors. There's also the guru as dharma, as the texts and practices. And this doesn't mean just the texts as a whole necessarily, that we can see them as a blessing, guiding presence, but particular teachings and practices may really speak to us. Even just little phrases, so-called pith instructions, which are short, pithy phrases that point us to experiencing something, the great leaving it as it is, for example, or whatever the instruction might be, or those inquiry practices that John sprinkles through this chapter. And they might be different ones for you. Or they might be poetry that inspires you, that stops the mind from its hamster wheel and falls open in awe, reverence, insight, illumination, appreciation, gratitude. So there's the words, the practices, and the teachings that we can experience for ourselves. And they become a kind of guru. Our experiences of those practices become a kind of guru. An awakened guide, let's say, is a definition for guru. And then there's one of the more interesting ones, which I've always loved to explore, and you could explore too and reflect upon, which is the guru of symbolic appearance. And this is, examples are given, for instance, often from experiences we may have in nature, such as gazing at the ocean and feeling the way the ocean is infinite, flowing back and forth, and that conveys, we can read off the ocean the way the waves just dissolve back into the ocean, the waves of thinking dissolve back into the ocean of awareness, the endless infinite expanse, or the way a waterfall just flows through endlessly, effortlessly, or the expansiveness of the sky, like our own expansive awareness, without boundary, without limit, without center even. Or the fire, many times the different elements are used. Fire, the vitality and aliveness, and the vividness of appearance, even as it's in constant transformation. Or the stability of a mountain, the earth itself. We connect with our earth body, as Lama Willis sometimes leads us in doing, or John encourages us to connect with the groundedness of the body, which is like a mountain, can have that quality of a mountain. And any number of experiences. John gives a very beautiful one in chapter 2, where he describes his son, Jonathan, as a young boy, joyfully stepping on a frozen puddle and shattering the ice. And in that moment, John's mind similarly kind of shattered and fell apart, because he was receptive, and there was something so spontaneous, like what seems solid can fall apart. That was the guru of symbolic appearance. And you may have many, you may notice that you start to have experiences like that if you're willing to enjoy them. Watching a sunset. Why do you think people like watching sunsets? There's a kind of beauty in that transformation and awe that takes us beyond ourselves. And in this way, there's a beautiful passage John has. Let's see if I can find this. After he describes that experience with his son, he says, as we practice over months and years, through the blessings of our spiritual benefactors and the incisive modes of inquiry that they impart, the persons and things all around us begin to manifest as messengers of wisdom. The world starts to reveal itself as our ultimate teacher and benefactor. Now that is the third kind of guru, the guru of symbolic appearance, of our own experience. Or as Kempo said, all animate and inanimate existence and all experiences inner and outer. And then the fourth type of guru is the absolute guru, the essence of all experience, the essence of ourselves, one's own deepest nature, the mysterious emptiness, openness, awareness, all of those combined, not just empty, but knowing, vivid, awake, aware, as John teases throughout this practice, and he gives quotes from Yosho Kempo and others about the mind's basic nature, which can seem abstract, but can actually be experienced, hopefully in the releasing part of the meditation, when we've been gentled into releasing the tight grip on ourselves through the blessing of communing with caring figures, with benefactors, and allowing ourselves to be, in a way, swept away with love and letting the boundaries melt a little and releasing our mind's tight grip, or through the three letting bees, relaxing and releasing into that openness. And that's a taste of the Absolute Guru, and it's one's own deepest nature. So it's not out there. All of the others are reflections, evocations of our own inner Guru. One is never apart, as Kempo said, from the true Guru, one's own deepest nature. And that is at the essence of this second chapter, which is about wisdom, the wisdom of just being without attachment to anything, but being aware of everything in a loving, expansive, accepting way. And you can see how this wisdom then informs and enhances the practices of love, of unbounded, unconditional love, because as the mind opens and releases its boundaries, the love too can flow more freely. And as the love flows more freely, the mind can release its boundaries. And so they're synergistic. And so this relates, interestingly, now we mentioned the four kinds of gurus. These practices that John has adapted in his book that we're taking up for this first half of the Margha year have been adapted from what are often called devotional practices of Tibetan Buddhism. And this is not devotion as we might interpret it in our dualistic Western religious way. It's not worshiping, it's not subservient. It's really a stance of gratitude, reverence, and receptivity. That's what devotion is. And as John beautifully says, it's not just our devotion, well, let me read a beautiful quote that some of you may have heard. This is not in his book, but I think it captures the essence of certainly the spirit of the spiritual benefactor and really of the whole book. And this is from John. Devotion. Devotion is not our devotion to the Buddhas, but our willingness to acknowledge how devoted the Buddhas are to us in our very being. To acknowledge that so deeply that our sense of separation from the Buddhas melts away. And we find that our deepest devotion, like the Buddhas, is to everyone in their very being. To me, that's the teachings as Guru, just hearing that, the beauty of that expression. I find that emphasis inspiring. Now, John, now we come back to, well, who are those spiritual benefactors? He mentions the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's in the Tibetan tradition. But they are not limited to Buddhist ones. Spiritual benefactors are anybody who has a stable presence, as John says, transparent to these qualities of their deepest nature so that they can express them freely as unconditional love, reverence for others, devotion to others, which we can sense and which evokes our own devotion. So as he says on page 48, Tibetans do this by envisioning their spiritual benefactors, their lamas and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as a radiant field of refuge before them. Then they receive the luminous blessings and energies of the benefactors, enduring love, compassion, liberating wisdom, and spiritual power into their whole being. The warm, radiant energy of these qualities helps them to relax their ego-centeredness, to melt away their self-protectiveness, and to sense the radiant ground of those qualities as absolute goodness. Pulled beyond themselves in this gentle way, They merge joyfully into oneness with their benefactors within that ground of being, which is the infinite non-conceptual nature of mind beyond separation, Buddha mind, Dharmakaya. So you remember Nashkampo referenced Dharmakaya. That's one of the so-called three bodies of the Buddhas. But it's really the three dimensions of being. The Dharmakaya, the great formless ultimate emptiness and openness and unimpededness. And the Sambhogakaya, which is the more energetic, expressive, alive quality, the knowing quality, the wisdom that's pouring forth in expression. And the Nirmanakaya is the more embodied form. But they're all on a spectrum. The three bodies are really one body, just as the three letting bees are really one big letting be. The body, breath, mind are just along a spectrum, a continuum of awareness, from more solid seeming to more subtle to utterly without form. But it's all awareness. Where's the body and the breath? Where's the actual boundary between body and breath and awareness? If you're not aware, you wouldn't sense any of those. And the breath is the body in its movement. And the body wouldn't even be alive without the breath. So there's this, it's all a continuous spectrum. So this sense of devotion, I remember one of Lama John's teachers and my teachers, Choki Nima Rinpoche, who's the older brother of Sunkni Rinpoche, who many of you know, who has come to Wonderwell and taught there. He sometimes poses a question, what are we really devoted to? Ultimately, we are devoted to our true nature. And our true nature is the nature of everyone, so we're devoted to it in them as well. Remember that beautiful, I and all beings are primordially Buddha. Knowing this to be true, I'm aligned with supreme enlightened mind. That's one of our prayers in the Natural Dharma Fellowship prayer, but it's acknowledging that. So this devotion is a devotion in awe and reverence and gratitude to those who have upheld this for us. And in the case of spiritual benefactors, we may have those from our lives, figures like the Dalai Lama or someone from your own tradition. John often cites Martin Luther King. There are people in the past like the Buddha. It could be archetypal figures like Tara or Chenrezig, or Jesus, historical figures, or whoever it is, or a sense of formless light and goodness and divinity, sacredness. And all of those are fine. And they can also be wonderful, caring figures that you see in your life, in your world, who were stable in that way, who seem to just radiate goodwill to everyone, and therefore included you. That's the key. They include you because their love is unconditional. And it doesn't matter what you do or what you think of yourself. So it's unwavering, and it's extended to all equally. So therefore, again, including you. And in particular, I hope you will take inspiration from the fact that just because you're in this Margha program, you're receiving teachings from and reading texts from teachers in this lineage, and therefore you're receiving their blessings. You don't have to become a Buddhist officially to receive that. These were being offered to whoever might benefit, and now you are. And they were praying and practicing through the millennia for all beings, including us. So you are being held by this lineage, just as John was saying, traditional Tibetans will envision their official sort of refuge tree, their refuge field, which includes all the lamas and the lineage and so on. But they actually are embracing you too. Everything. Certainly, I've benefited from such teachers. John has, Willa has, Lopon Liz. Everyone has who's helping to shape the Margha program. And you also are bringing whoever other benefactors are in your life. Those are informing your participation here and what you share with others, even if it's just in your silent practice. So you are bringing your lineages as well. All these lineages are coming together and we're benefiting from all of them. That is a really vast field of benefactors. So it's not just dependent on whether you can come up with one good caring moment, and maybe you're struggling with that, or you sometimes doubt, is that person really such a kind person, or I can't find anyone who cared for me. You're being cared for by an infinite array, whether we're aware of it or not. So every moment these blessings pour forth, as Kempo said. And it's just that opening and receptivity that we can start to sense that. And also, you can benefit from that sense of a vast field, or any one benefactor can serve in that way. It's all embodied in one. And the purity of the essential depth of each person, even the person in the caring moment, the glimmer in their eyes, meeting the glimmer in your eyes, the heart meeting your heart, that's a pure moment, a moment of great being, of great letting be, of leaving it as it is too, that kind of eased and we feel totally accepted. That's one of those potential moments of enlightenment that John began his book with, and that Nosho Kempo is referring to. That's the heart of all of this. So that has a lot to do with what devotion means in the Tibetan tradition. So just remembering that we're held in this way. Even the beginning of the Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, notice this when you read Tibetan texts, if you do, or any Buddhist text. He begins by saying, homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to those who go in bliss, the Dharma they have mastered, and to all their heirs, to all who merit veneration, I bow down. So before he begins his whole treatise on how one might develop bodhicitta, the altruistic wish to awaken on behalf of all, he pays homage to his teachers and to all Buddhas who are holding this. And it's easy for us Westerners to zoom past that sort of, ritual kind of evocation at the beginning and go right to, well, what are you trying to teach me? What are the practices I'm supposed to master on my own? But he's honoring them from the very beginning. He's taking that for granted. That's the milieu that they assume to be the case. So see what I wanted to move on to. So that's a lot about devotion, and I hope that shed some light on the context for exploring in chapter 2, especially the three letting bees and the inquiry practices. They're all ways of just accessing this beautiful, mysterious being that is cherished by the Buddhists throughout the ages and by all awakening beings, and which is glowing in our hearts and ready to flame forth even more with their help and with our own devotion to the practices. There's one other aspect about spiritual benefactors and why they can be helpful in bringing to mind when we're actually doing the practices. And that is, we may have a beautiful caring moment or even a stable caring figure with someone in our life who really wished us well, saw our innate goodness, and upheld that in us. And that's very nourishing, almost essential to become a full human being, to open to access. It could be a pet, as we often say, or anyone, a grandparent. They can be living or otherwise. They can be forever alive in our memory and in their impact on us. But they may wish us well, but not sure that we're going to be well. And something about the spiritual benefactor who can see right in through their own experience into the depth of their being, and knowing that that's the depth of your being, our being, and therefore complete confidence that you can be deeply free and awake and whole and healed. They know, in fact, they know you already have that. That's part of your nature already. And that kind of confidence can give us that kind of confidence too, to help us awaken to our own confidence, because that part of us is completely confident. It just needs to be allowed to come forth all the more, the blessings to pour forth all the more. So that's one benefit, and that can be especially helpful also when we're moving on. And so this chapter 2 and everything I'm talking about here continues to be incredibly relevant as we move forward into the other practices, extending love in the following months, and connecting with compassion and with our layers of suffering and so on. Being held by figures who have utter confidence in us and have utterly unconditional love that can flow through us in any circumstances with us that we may encounter, and also help us to ride that unconditional love out towards all beings whom they are already extending that love to. So I encourage you, even if you don't think of yourself as devotional, to see if you notice who might be such spiritual benefactors in your life. And ultimately, of course, the essence of the spiritual benefactor is in the heart of all of our benefactors. So maybe over time we start to notice those qualities abiding in those in our lives who we might have thought of being imperfect in certain ways, but noticing that they do embody, at least in certain moments, the power of a spiritual benefactor for us. But that can be very helpful as we move through these practices, and connecting us again and again with our deepest wisdom. So as far as the inquiry practices themselves, I'm not going to discuss them too much here, except to say I would suggest just exploring the ones that are meaningful to you, and it may be experimenting too. You may say, I don't get this one, or I know what this one is about. In either case, just try it. And a good time to do it, as John suggests in that chapter, is, let's say, when you've done the letting bees and you're in a nice relaxed state, or you've received the love and then you've let it flow through you, and you release visualization and you just rest the mind as it is, rest yourself as it is. In that kind of moment, openness and relative stability and calm, that might be a time to explore, where is the center of this? Is there an edge? Is there a color to this? Who is experiencing this? These kinds of questions. So it may not work, or a particular question may work at one time and then not another time. And to just pop the question and see what happens. And it may be just a momentary, brief experience of openness or things falling apart a little. Because even when we're relaxed, let's say calm abiding of shamatas in the first year of the Margha program, or receiving love and so on, there may be a subtle way of holding on to ourselves and trying to establish a kind of comfort zone and losing touch with sort of that vast unimpededness. We can always open a little more. One of our teachers in our lineage, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, gave the advice of just keep letting go. Just keep letting go. Whatever it is, just keep letting go. And that especially pertains to the letting be and letting go part of the practice. And another thing another helpful way of exploring these practices is remembering Nosho Khenpo saying, every moment these blessings pour forth. That can seem like a daunting process, like one is very far from that level of realization. Like, I don't feel every moment the blessings pouring forth. But let's just say, if he says every moment, he said any moment of great, in the moment of great letting be, this is available. So how about any moment, any given moment? You don't have to worry about whether the moment's to come. Any given moment, can you open to the love that's flowing to you, or to the pure openness that can be inspired by these inquiries or by just letting be? Any moment. And Tulku Urgyen, who is the father of Sogni Rinpoche, Choki Nyima Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche, who very famously used to introduce people to their nature of the mind through his very loving presence and through his kind of direction, so-called pointing out instructions, which are pointing you to the nature of your mind. And his constant instruction was short moments many times. So not making a big project out of it, but appreciating moments of these moments of insight, openness, unboundedness, just letting them be as they are for the life they have, which may be very brief. And then we get tangled up in things. We want to keep it longer, or where did it go? And maybe we can have a moment of freshness again. So through just revisiting this, not trying to artificially extend those moments. Now, this is different than the practice of receiving love, where we return again and again. We let the power of that practice return again and again. That's more of a relative conceptual practice. John also in this chapter refers to conceptual practice and non-conceptual practice. Conceptual practice is anything in which we're applying the mind in a particularly effortful way, using the powers of the mind, which is very skillful. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very helpful. We need to use the mind to transcend the mind, as it were. But there's also non-conceptual practice, which is beyond words, beyond effort even, and we're just letting be. You notice there's that back and forth that happens in these practices, the inviting the benefactors to be envisioned and receiving their love and letting go and surrendering. But we're using the mind in a very gentle, effortful way. And then we release it completely, and that's when we're relaxing into the more effortless and non-conceptual. And those moments don't have to be long because they're kind of timeless when they happen. And so just it's the authenticity and the freshness of them that's the key. Short moments many times. Which is why there's such power in the caring moment that John begins our practices with, introducing his practices. Find a caring moment. That one caring moment has infinite power. I remember attending a teaching by His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, in which he said something very similar. He said, a moment of happiness does not have to just make us happy one time. It can be recalled anytime, and we can re-inhabit that. Now I'm paraphrasing him. Re-inhabit, as John would say, that moment. So short moments, they're not really short. They're infinitely powerful and infinitely timeless. So giving ourselves over to each moment is the way in which the blessings can always pour forth. And this is something that they're not just moments by ourselves, they're moments with others, just cherishing a moment with someone else, noticing how our heart can open and appreciate beyond what we think they're doing for us or we're doing for them, just happy to be alive, as John has said. Those are very powerful moments. So I'd like to end then with reading one of those kinds of moments, and that was John's description of when Nosho Kempo came to Harvard Divinity School in 1994. Let's see if I can find this. Here it is. So hundreds of people, including teachers, scholars, students, and well-known Buddhist teachers from throughout New England, flooded the room and spilled out into the halls nearby, anxious to hear the words of such a renowned master. This is on page 47. But after Kempo was formally introduced and the audience was waiting with bated breath for his words, he didn't speak. He folded his hands in a reverent gesture of homage to all the enlightened ones. Then he just sat there silent before them, relaxed and unmoving. Yet over the next 10 minutes of silence, the natural ease, tranquility, and reverence that his body expressed, and the gentle power of his compassionate presence, quietly uplifted the minds of the audience. Kempo passed away years ago. Yet even today, just to recall his body sitting with such ease pulls me out of my ordinary frame of mind into deep peace and gratitude. The qualities of natural great peace, love, compassion, receptivity, and reverence that Kempo had practiced throughout his life had become so natural to him, so spontaneous, that his very being communicated them to others. He exemplified the liberating power of such practices, first to harmonize the mind with its boundless nature, then to embody its vast qualities in the most direct and simple ways. I can certainly attest to that. I was there. That was when I met Nosho Kempo. That was really when I met Dzogchen. It's when I met Lama John. I met Lama Suridas, who was translating for Nosho Kempo. And I too remember just the presence of his being. I didn't know it was 10 minutes it was silent. I think I felt more like an hour to me, or an aeon, in a good way. I certainly was in no hurry for him to speak. And I remember the freedom with which he moved his hands. They're like birds flying through the open sky. And I remember him saying something about your mind is so busy. It doesn't have to be so busy. And he just conveyed such freedom in his very being that it spoke to something in me that knew that same freedom. So, and I too, whenever I begin a teaching or leading meditation practice, or often when I meditate, I hearken back to him. I think of him in that moment. There's his hand reaching out, extending, sharing the blessings. That's ready to happen anytime for any of us. He hasn't stopped blessing us, and neither of our other benefactors. That moment is this moment, and every moment. So I invite you to explore this chapter in a spirit of not trying to take control of it or master it or understand it completely, but to see what speaks to you. It might be a single line from Nosho Kempo, who's quoted from here, in this chapter many times, or it might be something Lama John says, or something your Mitra says, or something your fellow Margha student says. There are marvelous expressions from each of us, or something you read, or a child stepping in a puddle of frozen water and the ice shatters the mind open. I also remember a beautiful moment in a winter retreat a year ago. Lama John was teaching, was in the audience, and Lama Willa was teaching. And at one point, Lama Willa paused in the middle of her teaching. And for some reason, maybe because we were hanging on every word, we're following along. In any case, I certainly felt like this is one of those precious moments. I didn't even have to say that. To say it kind of spoils it. I was just, wow. And then Lama Willa just said, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. And from the back of the room, Lama John said, it's not a problem. And we all laughed. That gap, that losing her train of thought, was actually an invitation for all of us to just be totally wide open, not knowing what would come next, just as she didn't know what was going to come next. So that spirit of the mystery of not knowing is actually okay. It's just fine to sit back and wonder, awe, mystery. Those are qualities too of the nature of mind, of our true being, as well as love and creativity and expressiveness and warmth. Um, so I always remember there's little moments like that are possible anytime. And in fact, the moment isn't just happening in between her words, it's happening in and through her words. Like John says, noticing the openness in and through all experience, the emptiness, so to speak, but the freedom in and through all experience. In that way, that's how ultimately all experiences are the true teacher. Not just because they're teaching us certain qualities about ourselves, like the flow of the ocean or the waterfall or the stability of the mountain and so on. Those are wonderful qualities. But each moment also, in its essence, every experience in its essence is this utter freedom and openness. And so every experience, so to speak, contains it, offers it. And in that case, every moment, all animate and inanimate existence, all experiences outer and inner, and none other than a true guru, the ultimate guru of complete awakening, already present, the little secret, the hidden treasure at the heart of everything, the hidden treasure at your heart, which is there even as the multiplicity of experiences continues to unfold. In a way, it's what makes them possible, that infinite freedom, the shape-shifting variety of experience. And it's what makes them kind of holy, sacred. Messengers, as John said, the entire world, everyone and everything, a messenger of wisdom. And we ourselves, you are a messenger of wisdom. So thank you for joining me this evening, or whenever it is you're watching this. Let us know how this works. I'm not sure I have the most scholarly approach, but I do have deep devotion for these readings, for these practices, for my teachers and for all of you. So enjoy the moment, now and always.